all you have to do in exchange is tell me how to find Clone Force 99.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in the Bad Batch episode 14, Tipping Point. So, in this episode, we're starting to see all the various threads for the season come together. The Batch's friendship with Phee Genoa, the excellent Crosshair storylines, Echo and Rex's side quest, and even Tech's racing abilities get featured here.
Execute a sharp swing back to port with 0 thruster pull.
The Tick turn?
The episode is called Tipping Point because this is a crux for the entire series. After this episode, Crosshair is no longer against the Bad Batch. Echo is trying to pull the Batch into Rex's war for clone rights, and more importantly, they've decided to stay on Pabu. Like I talked about last week, this is a trope in action drifter cinema.
What's action drifter cinema?
Well, it's something that I made up. Basically, it's an action movie that features a drifter protagonist. This protagonist comes from a world of violence, and anytime they try to set down roots, the violent world catches up to them and they have to leave for the good of the new place that they have helped to secure. So I suspect that they won't last long on Pabu and that their presence here will only bring danger to these people. But first, let's get into these Easter eggs.
You ready for this?
The opening titles have been tweaked slightly to show characters from the animated shows. We have Chopper from Rebels, Crosshair, a droid commando, not sure what this one is, let me know down in the comments, a clone cadet helmet, a female Mandalorian, and finally a clone trooper. So we start off on an Imperial base on Balmorra. Now this is a planet that was very prevalent in the old continuity, first appearing in Dark Empire 2. Now that is an interesting coincidence because that comic is about Luke facing off against a clone of the Emperor post Return of the Jedi, similar to what all the live action Disney shows are now building toward. Balmorra was also featured in the Old Republic games, so it's nice to see it finally appear in canon continuity. So ever since last season, we've been seeing the seeds of clone rebellion being planted in this show. There was Gregor's resentment about being replaced by the Regs, and the clones flat out refused to obey the Empire on Ryloth.
We're now being ordered to target the very people we swore to protect, and I will not be a part of it any longer.
But why are the clones starting to rebel? I thought they were programmed to serve, without question.
Well, they were, but as we saw in the Clone Wars, the actual board led them down a path of individualism, customizing their appearance and giving one another nicknames. Also, a lot of clones were like Rex and the Bad Batch. They didn't really like serving the Empire.
We're loyal to each other, not some empire.
The Empire also destroyed Topoka City, which the clones consider to be their homeworld. And then this season we have had some excellent episodes showing the Empire replacing clones with regular troopers and senators having to fight to give clones a pension. And then a couple episodes ago, we saw that the military still regards clones as units and not as people.
I don't like used equipment.
And the political arc of this show pointed out that they even have no representation in the Senate.
Clones do not have representation in the Senate.
So now they have a few million military-trained disenfranchised war veterans without purpose or human rights. I'd say that's a recipe for resentment and rebellion, and this perfectly mirrors the plight of so many combat vets when they get home. Like in 1932, there was a massive DC protest of former World War I vets called the Bonus Army. 43,000 homeless vets and their families slept on the Capitol lawn. The Depression had put them out of work, and they protested to get their benefits early, and the President, Hoover, ordered the Army to use tanks to clear them out, killing 2 veterans. And we see the same pattern all the way up through modern day, when vets still struggle to get their benefits and adequate psychological care, or even how Congress dragged their feet to give funding for the 9/11 first responders. Look, there is a real pattern throughout history where people forget about their veterans after the fighting is done, and now that's in Star Wars. So we're following some clone troopers who have been arrested. Now these people arresting them are conscripted stormtroopers. They're regular humans who were drafted into service, and then we have these clone commandos who first appeared in the Republic Commandos video game. Now anytime we see evil cloners moving around in this show, it's always with these guys protecting them. So it seems like the clone commandos are like especially loyal to the Empire. Got a couple theories on why that is that I'll talk about later on. Now I do think it's interesting how everything in the Bad Batch and in the Mandalorian is now laying the groundwork for cloning the Emperor so they can all explain this one line.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Which never stops making me laugh. In fact, I love that clip so much that we made a t-shirt of it. Our brand new Somehow the Emperor Returned parody t-shirt, which you can get now at our merch store at shopzeroedition.com. We have lots of other high quality tees in our store, including our Doug Foundling t-shirt, the original trilogy t-shirt, and this top 5 shirt where you can write in your top 5 movies or shows. Zero Edition also has many other quality shirts like Vulture Scrapyard to tees from other channels like Heavy Spoilers and Real Rejects. Guys, look, shop in our merch store for items like like the Emperor Returns tee is the best way you can support our channel, so please check out the link in the description below. Now, the clones are being brought onto an Imperial prison ship, similar to the one that we saw in The Mandalorian. Prisoners were kept in these ships and shuttled around the galaxy because it made it harder for them to escape. And in the High Republic era, the inmates were brought to work on planets to repair damage done by their crimes. So I did think that it was weird that all of a sudden the stormtroopers are flying ships when normally they have like Imperial pilots do that, but I guess conscripting a human military takes a while to replace all the clone pilots, so these guys had to double up duty.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? High five. And then the prison ship runs into Rex and Echo. Now remember, Echo left the Bad Batch a few episodes ago to help Rex in his quest to liberate clones.
I'm going with Rex. The clones will need our help now more than ever.
The other two clones are Fireball and the aforementioned Gregor. And remember, about 16 years after this episode, Gregor and Rex are going to be enjoying retirement together, fishing off an ATTE in the desert.
This could be him! A big bongo!
So it doesn't look good for Fireball then.
You're still thinking that Fireball is gonna die?
Well, we'll see, won't we? So they pull off a daring prison break by docking with the Imperial ship, similar to The Mandalorian Season 1 when they broke prisoners out of a Republic jail. Also, I appreciated that the ship used docking thrusters to guide it through space. Normally, Star Wars ignores real-world science like this, and the ship just would have kind of floated up to the ship and linked up. It's a cool detail. The boarding hatch opens and closes just like the one in the Millennium Falcon, and the Imperial officer kills himself rather than reveal where they were taking the clones.
Hey, we've seen that before.
Yes, we have. The clone assassin a few episodes ago also killed himself. And remember, he also had his CC number erased.
His identifying number's been wiped.
I was not aware that was possible.
So I think that what the Empire is doing here is taking disobedient clones, wiping their minds and their CC numbers to turn them into mindless, obedient assassins, similar to these clone commandos that seem fiercely loyal to the Empire. And eventually, this is what Hemlock would have done to Crosshair. So notice the music when the Star Destroyer comes to rescue the prison ship. Kevin Kiner's score kind of sounds like it's the beginning of the Imperial March, but it's not quite finished. So, in the Clone Wars series, Kiner intentionally did not use any music from the original trilogy, except for like the occasional Yoda theme. But in the show Rebels, they began to use those themes from the John Williams score, because on the timeline, the stories were approaching those of the original trilogy.
And now here comes John Williams. And we have a new generation of Star Wars.
Also, in the show Obi-Wan Kenobi, we continuously heard original trilogy motifs that were not finished until the finale of the show.
We're going to be late. Come on, let's hurry it along. How is she doing?
You are wise, discerning, kind-hearted.
So if you look at this across the timeline, these musical choices make sense. Bad Batch and Obi-Wan are introducing the musical motifs that will be present in Rebels and then finally in A New Hope. The fighters launched from the ship are V-Wing starfighters left over from the Clone Wars, still waiting to see TIE fighters make their first appearance on the timeline. Now these clones are likely being taken to Tantiss, where Crosshair is being held.
Yeah, what's the Tantiss again? What is that?
Well, in the old Legends continuity, Tantiss is where there were cloning chambers where Luke fought an evil clone of himself called Luke Skywalker. But now Tantiss is a black site cloning facility, top secret, where more than likely they're working on a secret project to do this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And now this is where they're torturing poor Crosshair. Notice the glowing shackles that he's wearing are similar to the ones that Grogu had to wear in The Mandalorian, which makes me think that these are standard issue, and Moff Gideon had to commission a teeny weensy tiny pair of them to be made for a baby. And the machine they strap him down to is also similar to the one that Pershing used on Grogu, appropriate since Pershing was also part of this same geneticist guild, as indicated by the patch on his sleeve, meaning that he probably worked in Tantiss like years after this, or at least was very familiar with their systems. And then Hemlock shows up to torture him, and remember that he is voiced by Jimmy Simpson from Westworld, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and Lyle the intern from Letterman.
Tell me how to find Clone Force 99.
It's interesting that Crosshair immediately knew why they wanted to find his old squad.
The kid. You're wasting your time. They'll never turn her over.
And Hemlock's response tells you everything you need to know about clone rights.
They don't have a choice. She is a clone, and therefore Imperial property.
In a recent episode of The Mandalorian, the clone Dr. Pershing talked about the legal difficulties of cloning.
The ethics of cloning are complicated.
And now we're seeing why those legal difficulties exist. The Empire considered clones to essentially be slaves. Then a torture droid comes in, just like the one we saw in A New Hope, and I never noticed before that the red dot on it kind of makes it look like the Death Star. Neat. And then we go to a poor region of Coruscant, and if this looks familiar, it's because this is probably the hangar that belongs to the Martez sisters. Ahsoka teamed up with them in an arc of the Clone Wars, and then last season we saw that they were working for Rex. So it makes sense that Rex's clones would headquarter in their shop. The senator they're meeting is Chuchi, a Pantoran who appeared several times in the Clone Wars, and a few episodes ago she was fighting for clone rights.
These are soldiers who defended us, defended our worlds.
Now back on Tantiss, Crosshair is able to fake the effects of the torture just enough to escape. I thought it was interesting that he shot the doctor with the stun setting. This could be because now we're supposed to sympathize with Crosshair, and maybe it also shows that this doctor could turn out to be a secret ally who helps the Bad Batch down the line. In fact, you know what? What if she turned out to be Pershing's mom, the scientist who ends up dying because he couldn't clone her organs?
Had simple organ cloning been available on my home world, her death would have been easily preventable.
After all, he says that she was a doctor and a scientist. In the hallway, Crosshair runs into a mouse droid, which we first saw in A New Hope.
You ain't never gonna believe what I just seen.
And during his escape, he actually misses 2 shots. Now this is the best way they could have shown how groggy he is from this torture. It's like when Donnie doesn't roll a strike. You know the world is off its axis. This console looks very Imperial, incorporating designs that we saw in the Death Star, both with the console itself and with the grate on the walls. After he sends this message, the place is flooded with very easy to see poison gas, just like the easily avoidable gas that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon escaped from in The Phantom Menace.
Yeah, the gas why'd it have to be green? It could have just been odorless. Like, they could have put carbon monoxide in the room.
Yeah, I know. So now Crosshair is warning the Bad Batch to hide and keep away from Omega, which is a total 180 from where he was last season when he was the one in charge of hunting them down. But that mission has brought him nothing but misery. It's how he got his scars. He was abandoned on Tantiss and then left for dead in the Ice Storm. I also think he developed a slight personal loyalty to Omega. When they were on Tapoka City, she seemed to empathize with him when no one else could.
It's not your fault. You can't help it.
And in the finale of Season 1, she saved his life and he saved her droid.
Consider us even.
But then he's interrupted by Hemlock, who's built up an immunity to the gas like Wesley and iocane powder.
I spent the last few years building up an immunity to iocane powder.
And then we go back to Space Grease, where the Bad Batch think that they're going to be able to live in peace. But like I said, violence always finds the violent. We see a few familiar alien species on Pabu, including a Twi'lek, a Rodian, and an Arcona. Now Wrecker is living his best life, again showing that clones have an affinity for fishing because that is how Rex, Wolf, and Gregor spent their retirement.
Nice catch, old-timers.
And notice that Wrecker has a double pole to provide extra support for his catches because a guy his size would be able to reel in a much bigger hit. We're seeing the push and pull between Hunter's life as a soldier and his potential life of a man of peace. After he tells Shep that soldiers can't put down roots, he says,
"Is that all you are?"
And this is the same question that millions of clones now have to ask themselves. Are they just good soldiers who follow orders, or can they be something more? This also goes back to the Bad Batch's ongoing theme of individuality versus conformity, or free will versus determinism. When Echo lands, he and Hunter do the Predator handshake.
You ain't kidding.
You son of a bitch.
Back on Tantiss, Hemlock has a Zoom call with Governor Tarkin, the classic Star Wars baddie from A New Hope. But in the Clone Wars, Rebels, and this series, he is voiced by Steve Stanton. Stanton did not play him in Rogue One, but he did voice Admiral Raddus. And Stanton also did a spot-on impression of Ben Kenobi in Rebels.
What you need, you already have. Unfortunately, you seem to be letting it all go.
The two of them talk about the growing clone rebellion.
A growing number have been questioning their orders.
And then Hemlock asks why bother decommissioning the clones and says,
"If you send them to me, I can deal with them in other ways."
What's he talking about?
Okay, well this is where we're getting to a little bit of theory space. It definitely sounds like he's going to liquidate the clones for their genetic material like a clone holocaust. That would be horrible and maybe a bit too close to the real world events of Nazi Germany, although it would explain what happened to all these clones in these intervening years. I think it's more likely that instead of killing the clones, Hemlock experiments on them and wipes their minds to become clone assassins. He's more like the Joseph Mengele of the Empire. But back on Pabu, Hunter and Echo have a conversation that is laying the groundwork for the Bad Batch's new direction.
Can't defeat them. It's not about that. It's about fighting for our brothers.
So Echo basically admits that they can't beat the Empire, but he refuses to stop fighting because he sees himself as a soldier, whereas Hunter is thinking about pulling a cut and giving up the life of a soldier altogether.
When will it be enough?
For him, his brothers are only Clone Force 99 and his family is Omega, but Echo began as a regular clone trooper who came into the Bad Batch later, so it makes sense that these two would have conflicting loyalties about who is part of their clone families. And speaking of clone families, when they hear Crosshair's transmission, they obviously suspect that it's a trap!
Like he said for us before.
Wait, what's he talking about?
Crosshair lured the Bad Batch to Kamino to trap them for the Empire.
Oh yeah.
And even though Crosshair sends them Code 88, which means to hide, they decide to come after him. So maybe that's what Hemlock wanted all along? I mean, probably not, but events definitely did work out in his favor. Hemlock ends the episode saying,
"He means nothing to you."
Which isn't actually true. Crosshair had a couple of meaningful but short interactions with Omega that we talked about earlier. But remember, Crosshair did try to kill the Bad Batch last season. He tried to trap them inside of an engine, which backfired on him and burned his face. But now he's seen how little the Empire cares for his kind, and he wants to keep his brothers safe from the kind of torture that he is now enduring. So Crosshair takes the torture, but you never know. It might be too late to save him, and he could die in the finale, redeeming himself for the crime of turning on his squad. I hope not, though, because Crosshair remains the best character on this show. But what did you guys think of the episode? Let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.